After an impressive win against the Colorado Avalanche, in which the Jets were just flat out better and made some big line changes, it seems like Winnipeg might actually be sticking with it. Let's chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, like we mentioned earlier, the Jets are about to take on the Vancouver Canucks, and it seems, if all is according to what we're seeing from the Jets media and Winnipeg's practices, that the line changes the Jets instituted against Colorado might be sticking around for at least one more game. And if you know what I'm of a sort of the opinion of, and if you know what I've talked about with this team, you know that this is extremely good news for me personally, and I think for a lot of Jets fans. We've been begging this team to make some kind of a change the past few weeks, and funny enough, it's been less about the top line and more about the middle six. So this is potentially very exciting. But before we dive into that and what it might mean for this game, just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, like I said, the line combinations for Winnipeg coming up in this Vancouver game are going to be extremely telling, right? We, talked about it on the past episode with Winnipeg versus Colorado, a very big game and one which the Jets actually played very well in. It was a great 5v5 game against a strong team and, an obvious division rival that has been really climbing in the ranks and certainly getting back up into the top of the Central Division. And so it was a very big deal for the Jets to actually outplay Colorado and limit some of their most dangerous weapons. It's not often that the Jets are able to do this against guys like Makar, McKinnon, Rantanen, but the Jets found a pretty good formula and shut them out 3-0. Is that going to be the best predictor for the playoffs? Let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's still a long time between now and April, but I think for what I had been talking about for a while, which is that the Jets just needed a shakeup with how their lines are arranged, it seems like it immediately paid off. Now, this next game against Vancouver may not be the best indicator of just how good these lines are going to go for the future, but I would say I'm intrigued all the same. So, as you might expect, CSV top line not changed. I don't think it necessarily needs to be messed with at present. I would only really switch it if they really start to hit, some rough patches. So far, the past couple of weeks, they've been good with some, again, maybe one or two little caveats, right? The actual scoring chance creation is kind of like 50-50, but they are generally creating very dangerous opportunities when they are. So that, I think, is really helping them in the expected goal category. And just watching them, I think they've generally been fine. I do think that at some point you'd like them to be a little more than fine more consistently. Fine is good enough for your middle six. You kind of need your top line to be elite. And in some ways this unit is, especially when they start doing that globetrottery stuff. It's just not like every game that they do it. And I don't necessarily need them to do it every game. I just think compared to other top lines around the league, there's still a small gap that they need to kind of clear to, I think, in my mind, really earn the confidence of everyone. But I will say that compared to last year, it's a much better version of this unit, and I think Kyle Connor has probably led the way there. Now, the second line is where things really start getting interesting. You've got Ehlers, Lowry, and Iafallo, which I think should be a good trio. Iafallo has really shown the past couple of games that he can, quite frankly, play in a ton of different roles, and he's been able to keep up. Wherever he goes next, whether he signs a cheaper deal with the Jets or goes out as a free agent, Sure, he may not have been the sort of offensive middle six dynamo that I was kind of expecting, but defensively and as a PKer, he's been fantastic for the Jets. The offense of his game, I was kind of hoping would translate from LA. Hasn't necessarily so far. Maybe it will alongside Lowry and Ehlers. Very curious to see how this trio works. Third line, you've got Niederreiter, Kupari, and Perfetti. I would honestly like to see Gustafsson in place of Kupari, but I can kind of understand why they're going with this. Kupari's speed might be the more valuable asset here. The only thing is, I just think Gustafsson tends to be a little more creative down the center and has an extra layer of IQ and decision making that maybe Kupari doesn't. But that's perhaps where Perfetti and Niederreiter can help. The good news is Niederreiter and Perfetti and Kupari all seem to have pretty good chemistry very quickly, and they were all playing at a pretty good clip. So I would expect this line to be pretty solid against Vancouver. The fourth line, for the most part, nothing really surprising. Barron, Gustafsson, and Toninato. I do think that as we start getting closer to the postseason, we might see a little bit more of Jibrikov or something rotate somewhere in this bottom six. Hard to say exactly where, but we'll keep an eye out for that. On defense, the Jets, the only change they're making is to the third pairing. Apparently, Stanley and Heinola were seen together again. I hate this pairing so much, and you know I do. It just is what it is at this point. I'm not going to spend too much more time talking about it. You know my opinion. You know why I don't like it. Well, let's move on to Vancouver, right? The Canucks are kind of in a weird spot right now. They have been up and down, up and down, up and down, and it's led to like a 3-3-4 record in their last 10. And there seems to be some real off-ice drama going on with this team. Up front, they've got DeBrusk, Pettersson, and Besser as your first, Höglander, Miller, and Garland as your second, Heinen, Suter, and Sherwood as your third, DiGiuseppe, Bluger, and Lekkerimäki on your fourth line, which, you look at this four-line team, and it's pretty darn deep. And you'd think offensively things were going pretty well, but it's been a little uneven. This squad, I think, has a particular vulnerability, and it kind of undoes the offensive skill, and that's when you look at the defense. Up front, you've got Hughes and Myers as your first pairing, which, Hughes is incredible. It's when you look at everyone else that the problems start to happen. You all know Tyler Myers. You know what he's capable of. And then you get into Brisebois and Soucy as your second pairing, and Forbort and Juleson as your third. This is a very, very, very bad defense. Without Hronek and some of the other guys, it is ugly. And, this is probably where the Jets stand to make their biggest impact in this game is this blue line. It's nightmarishly bad. This is one of the worst blue lines out there. And if there was not Hughes in this lineup, it would probably be arguably worse than what the Jets had a couple of years ago when we had like Morrow and Sherrod and all those guys in at various times, right? You remember Joe Morrow playing with sometimes with Beaulieu and stuff. Ugh, just not good days. So this is rough. And that's where I think Winnipeg should very clearly win. Obviously we also win in net. Lankinen and Demko, both pretty good goalies, neither of them anywhere close to Hellebuck. I would say that this is going to be a 4-1 or a 4-2 win for the Jets. I'm thinking and feeling pretty good about this. Give me your score predictions below, though. Sometimes I get myself in trouble when I get confident or perhaps even a little bit cocky about what I think the Jets are going to do. But I just have a good feeling about this game. What'll be really interesting is what happens if a guy like Pettersson perhaps leaves this Canucks team, right? That has been, discussed about recently. And I want to chat about kind of the price of greatness and what Winnipeg should be willing to give up should a Pettersson or a Barzal or any of these other players somehow become available and willing to join the Jets. We'll chat about that in just a little bit. But before we go too much further, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. Obviously, this upcoming weekend is probably going to be one of the most exciting of the entire NFL season. We've got Buffalo-Baltimore. That is going to be an amazing game. Apologies to you Steelers fans. I know that was probably a bit of a tough one. Same for you Broncos fans, but I will say for you Broncos fans, you've got a reasonably brighter future looking forward, and I think that there is some real stuff to build on. But I would say that this game, very clearly for each team, we're probably looking at least 3 touchdowns per squad. I would give the over for that. I just think that we're going to see a bit of a shootout between two of the best quarterbacks in football. I'm excited, and the only way that you can actually get in on the action is to visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Hey friends, welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting about what I would like to call the price of greatness. You just heard me talking about the Vancouver Canucks, and they are experiencing some very interesting off-ice drama. JT Miller and Elias Pettersson apparently do not see eye to eye on things, which is not the first time that we've heard this sort of rumor, but, certainly every team at some point or another has guys who don't like playing with each other, who may not see eye to eye, and when they are in prominent roles, it can lead to some big friction. The Jets are certainly no stranger to that. We have had our fair share of off-ice drama. What that does mean, though, is that the Jets have a pretty unique opportunity. Winnipeg has a very big gap down the middle. I know that Scheifele is the first line center, but if you really look at a lot of the top lines out there, especially the elite ones, Scheifele would probably end up being a second line center on like a truly elite contender. And I don't know that that's necessarily a mark against Scheifele just so much as it is the tier of player that we're seeing elsewhere. Now, I will say that since Team Canada snubbed Scheifele, he's been on an absolute goal-scoring tear. So for me, I don't always think about him not being a first-line center. Sure, would you want a McKinnon or a McDavid? Absolutely. But I think the Jets have ways to get really good and honestly elite first-line production out of this team without necessarily having the generational game-breaking skater on that first line. It's just how you optimize and arrange this stuff to build your top-line combos into something even better at controlling plays. So in that respect, you'd probably be looking to get a second-line center, right? But maybe a guy who is sneakily your 1C. It would give the Jets 2 potential top-line options, and I think that just adds so much more versatility to this team and honestly gives them a play driver that they're just missing down the middle. I think Lowry, for the meantime, is going to do a really good job, but I do wonder once Nemestikov is healthy again, which sounds like he may not be super, super close, but assuming that Winnipeg goes back to the old ways, you suddenly have that 2C vacancy again. But for me, I think the Jets need something even better, right? A second line center role needs offensive skill, lots of good finishing, elite passing and playmaking. And Lowry can do some of that. He's very good, actually, and perhaps a bit underrated. He just doesn't always finish, and he's not necessarily a pure setup guy, right? He's like a bulldozer of offense. That's kind of the way to think about it. Kind of like early days Brady Tkachuk, who generated lots of chances, didn't really finish on many of them. He does now, but back then, early in his career, he was kind of the Corsi god without necessarily being the goal god. So this means the Jets have an interesting scenario where rather than just going for a rental, this might be a year where the Jets could really, and I mean really, swing for the fences. Now, this would very much go against their usual mantra. Winnipeg is one of those teams that doesn't like to spend a lot and go after a big-termed player. Because like half of these guys have some sort of no movement or no trade clause, which makes that kind of a bit of a non-starter. But also the Jets have traditionally talked about drafting and developing and building their team out of that model, the former Nashville model that they idolize. But at some point, you've got really one of the truly greatest goalies of all time. You have got a Norris caliber defender in Morrissey. You've got Mark Scheifele locked up. You've got Kyle Connor for another year and a half playing the best hockey of his career. You've still got Ehlers for however long he's going to be here. And you've got Velarde and Perfetti on their last year or so of RFA stuff. Obviously, Perfetti's got one more season after this, and then he's still an RFA at the end of this. But basically, you're talking about this 1 to 2 year window where this team's cap is relatively lower, and it means you can swing for the fences. Now, I know a lot of Jets fans don't like thinking about this, and in fact, oftentimes we've heard different comments and things about Winnipeg maybe not being too needing to shake things up and not needing to go after a big player. I'm sorry, but I just don't agree. I think that if you are going to make a change and really go for it, there really should be no prize pigs in this org. Pretty much almost any prospect or pick or even young roster player should be on the table if you're talking about getting somebody who's of a Barzal quality, of a Pettersson quality, stuff like that. These are the franchise level players, and they don't really come along that often. I know people are going to look at Barzal's numbers and kind of think that he doesn't look that good, especially for 9 mil. I promise you, he comes to Winnipeg, and it's going to be like the first time he hit the league when he was absolutely shooting the lights out and was just a dominant force. Back when he first started, he was like an 85-point rookie in his first full NHL season. And, the Islanders don't tend to be that great offensively. This is a team that, generally speaking, does not create loads of chances. And so Barzal, I think, especially playing with the likes of Connor and Scheifele and Ehlers and all of these incredibly creative talents who, on their own, are already vicious enough, I think he would flourish at a level that you've never really seen from him since some of the early seasons. Even last year, again, on a bad Islanders team, he was a point per game. He dropped an 80-point season. You cannot really find those. And I get why people are afraid to trade futures and young assets. The thing is, unless Perfetti somehow gets moved into a better role or, Lambert really hits his stride, which he still hasn't entirely, he just, none of these guys are probably going to be a Barzal level player. Matt at his best is one of the most creative forces in the NHL. He is a complete monster. And apparently, according to Carter Brooks, the Jets have had some interest in him. The asking price is something like a young roster player or two and 1 or 2 prospects, which, in my mind, I think it's probably more like 1 roster player and 2 good prospects. We're probably looking at a Perfetti, a Lambert, maybe a Lucius or a Barlow or something, maybe something else on top of that. We're talking about a young player in Barzal who's still got some time left on his term, quite a bit actually. And so this is a big cost-controlled, contract-controlled asset. And a player like this, whether the Jets would go for Barzal or somebody in this vein, this would be a game changer for Winnipeg and would also likely extend their window. Does it eat up a lot of cap space? Yeah, sure it does. But if you really want to retain your talent and have quality, this is probably a great way to do it. And Barzal is on a team that's not going anywhere. He apparently has like a 10-team trade list that he said he would accept a move to. I doubt Winnipeg is on it, but even if he's not willing to come to the Jets, somebody probably would, right? Pettersson maybe would consider it. I don't know what his whole situation with Vancouver is. And yes, his cap hits higher, but even the worst version of Pettersson that you're seeing is still a career point per game player. He is almost an unequaled finisher around. He's super creative. He actually does a ton of defensive work that really goes under the radar because people assume he's just soft and lanky. He's really not. He'll block shot lanes. He'll go after and force turnovers. He does so much defensive work that I think really goes under the radar. And a guy like him, I think, would kind of be the heir apparent to Laine, the Laine that we never really had once Patrick left. Now, again, you are going to have to pay through the nose to get either of these kinds of players. But I think if the Jets truly want to take advantage of what they've got in Hellebuck, which is by a country freaking mile, the best goalie in the league, and really one of the best goalies already in history, you've got to do something big here. Now, I'm not going to say that the Jets are going to make a bad decision if they go with rentals. I just think if you really want to swing for it, if you really want to change the future of this franchise and make this team, a multi-year contender, this is probably a phenomenal time to go after a big fish. The Jets are not likely to draft one of these. I know people are really dazzled by Kieran Walton just killing it in the OHL right now. He's not going to be one of these kinds of players, most likely. It would take a miraculous trend for him to keep up this progression and turn into a player of this caliber. I think guys like him will be elite complementary guys, but you're talking about a generational franchise talent in the likes of a Pettersson or somebody of that caliber. So, for Winnipeg, if the door is open, I would be banging on it. Winnipeg doesn't have past the next couple of seasons that many assets under contract control and term, and there's no guarantee of how many of these guys are going to come back. Ehlers is probably on the way out after this year. Connor, I think Connor sticks around. I'm not sure what the price tag is going to be, though, but I get the sense he'll hang around with Winnipeg. Beyond that, though, Velarde will need a big raise. Perfetti probably does. If he stays, I don't know that he will. He may get traded. So, Winnipeg really shouldn't be afraid to swing big. Lambert, I love him. He's a great prospect. I would trade him in a heartbeat if it meant Pettersson was, part of the return, right? I really wouldn't think twice about it. If you want to take advantage of what you've got in Hellebuck putting up Vezina numbers right now, you've got to go for it. Lambert may eventually become a phenomenal top-line player, but that's probably in a couple of seasons. It's not now, and the Jets' window is now. So you either put up or you shut up, and I think this franchise really could turn heads if they play this entire upcoming trade deadline and even the summer really well. But I want to talk about why this is a little bit tricky as well. I'm really advocating for Winnipeg to be aggressive, but the trade waters are going to be tricky, and I want to chat about that in just a brief moment. Before we go too much further, though, did want to shout out our friends and partners at Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That's definitely happened to me. I've got plenty of sports and pop media subscriptions out there, and it can be hard to keep track of it, especially when you start subscribing to bundle deals. You may be paying for something twice that you didn't even know about. Rocket Money is here to help because they help you track them down, cancel them, and it's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money can monitor your spending, help lower your bills, and grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's your subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subs, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. If you are like me, and you are finding yourself spending way too much on extra subscriptions that you don't even need, go to Rocket Money right now. Cancel your unwanted subs and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on these closing thoughts as we are just wrapping up with some, chatting and following up about what I just said about hoping the Jets really go for it this upcoming trade deadline and season in terms of trading for a big fish. The tricky part for Winnipeg is that they're not going to be the only team out there hunting for a big name player. If either of Barzal or Pettersson or guys of these calibers are actually available, I would almost say that like half the league would be in on these guys. Now, there's only a handful of teams that are going to be able to pull these kinds of deals off, but a lot of them are going to have loads of futures and stuff that may be better than what the Jets can offer. Winnipeg is not exactly talent poor right now. They've got a lot in their pool that I think is looking pretty tasty. Kevin, he just signed his contract, but we've got a lot of like tiered prospects in his category that I think, could reasonably include it in a trade. You've got Cole Perfetti, who was a young 20s player. I'm personally less interested in moving him unless we're talking about a really good, and I mean like a needle moving top end player. Otherwise, I'd prefer to see what Perfetti can be for this team with a couple of changes to how the coaching staff approaches the roster construction. But I also worry that, there's always going to be some other team that's prowling around. Vegas has been notorious for, jumping in and landing guys like Mark Stone ahead of Winnipeg and stuff. And it just drives me crazy that it feels like at times Winnipeg hasn't wanted to ante up. Timo Meier, I think the Jets were in on. They really didn't go for it. In that case, it maybe panned out all right, but Timo Meier has recently been killing it with New Jersey, so maybe he would have killed it with the Jets. I don't know. I just kind of wonder if Winnipeg is really willing to shake things up. There have been rumors that they are perhaps not as interested in changing things this season. If that is true, and I don't entirely believe it is, I would be disheartened, but I don't think Winnipeg is going to stand still. This feels like a year that's primed for Winnipeg to try for a cup. You've got the best goalie in the league. you've got a team that, generally speaking, is pretty good at, shutting opponents down. Defensively, they've still got a couple of vulnerabilities, but when everyone's healthy, right, a top four of Morrissey, DeMello, and Sandberg and Pionk has been very, very good. The third pairing, maybe some question marks, but in terms of the forward grouping, your bottom six has generally been pretty Loctite, and you have been getting better results from the top line. So really, there's not been many better opportunities to swing big. And I think, a lot of teams are probably looking at the playoff field and thinking, this could be our year. You look at the playoff competitors out there and the true Stanley Cup contenders, there's just not that many that scare you. Colorado in the postseason is always a worry for me personally. Vegas too. But in the East, right, if you were to look at the Eastern Conference, you'd maybe think about the Florida Panthers. I mean, Toronto's leading the Atlantic, but do you really trust Toronto in the playoffs? I don't know. The Panthers have won the Cup. They did it last year, but they've been a little bit leakier this season. Tampa Bay looks probably one of the stronger teams there, but you look at their record and it's not as impressive as, their goal differential and stuff. And so it kind of feels like you've got a wide open field. And for the Jets, I really feel like that could be a huge advantage. And with all these teams that are going to be dealing with, likely fatigue and stuff from the schedule compression and all of this Four Nations craziness, I don't know, man. I'm looking at this opportunity and the season that's in front of us. And I just ask myself, why not? I think it's going to be difficult to pull off a major deal. I think it's going to be a bit of a dogfight for some of these top players. And even for the deadline rentals, I could see it being really expensive. But, like I said just a moment ago, there shouldn't be any sacred cows for the Jets. You have so many amazing pieces. It is time to cash in. You've drafted well. You're getting really good production from your prospects. You have a pretty good foundation to add to. It is time to go for it. This market is going to be challenging. It is going to be expensive. But we've already seen guys like Kaapo Kakko not really go for that much. Kakko now has 7 points in 10 games for Seattle. And sure, the Kraken might be crappy, but Kakko was a player I would have been very interested in, right? A guy that was young, that had an interesting draft pedigree, and who had some very interesting underlying numbers. And I thought, maybe there's more to his game than we're seeing with the Rangers. And so far with Seattle, that's kind of looked like the case. And so I want the Jets to be going and exploring every nook and cranny for, any sort of value they can get. They need a center. They probably need a good top four defender. This is the time to go shopping. Now, they don't have to necessarily do the deal right now. You want to probably accrue a little more cap space by the deadline before then. But Winnipeg, man, I think that this year is one of those why not us years. That's what I'm getting. And for as many criticisms as I do have of some of the decisions I've seen from this team this year and some of the lineup challenges, that doesn't mean that I think they can't pull it off. If they make some smart choices by the deadline or before then, I think this team could be sitting real pretty by the time April rolls around. They've already kind of avoided some of the really bad collapses. They're like 6-2-2 in their last 10 games. Not the clearest picture of how they've played since, December, but I'll cut them a bit of slack recently. The last several games they've actually been playing relatively well. Hasn't always led to wins, and I think there have been a couple of key problems where, the Kings game, for instance, they really didn't create anything offensively, and I think they didn't do enough to try and change that. But in some of the other games, even in some of their defeats, they were at least controlling play for the most part, and so I'm just inclined to want to reward this team with something big. And I hope the coaching staff and the front office agree. I think that, the field's wide open. And in that case, go for it. This team is not forever. The score is not forever. We are not promised tomorrow with Connor Hellebuck putting up generational numbers. Make the most of it while you can. But I'd be curious to know who you think could fit that bill. Drop your most desired trade targets in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. Tomorrow, we will have some coverage of Winnipeg versus Vancouver, and hopefully I get to talk about a win. Would be nice. That would be win 30 on the season, which, considering you are 44 games through already, 45 being your 30th win, not so bad when you really think about it. But again, we'll talk about that tomorrow. For tonight's episode, I will bid you adieu. Thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow, so have a great night, stay safe, and go Jets go.